mysterious little girl walks into court and turns a powerful judge's life upside down. What secret has been buried for years? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Night hung heavy over Atlanta, pressing close around the pools of neon light that flickered across cracked sidewalks. Wind rustled discarded cups and scraps of paper down Peachtree Street, where the few people still outside hurried past each other with wary glances. At the edge of a shuttered storefront stood a little black girl, her figure almost swallowed by the shadows. Her name was Imani Harris. She couldn't have been older than 8, and yet she stood barefoot on the cold pavement as if she'd been there forever. Her hair was tied in loose braids, some escaping their ribbons and brushing the dirt-smudged skin of her cheeks. She wore a denim jacket at least 2 sizes too big, its sleeves frayed and stained. Underneath, her thin arms hugged her torso as though she were trying to keep herself from unraveling. People passed her, pretending not to look. Some slowed for a moment, their curiosity winning out, but then hurried away the instant her gaze met theirs. But not everyone got away so easily. "You shouldn't be out here alone," said a man in a navy suit, stepping closer with a forced fatherly smile. His shoes glistened in the streetlights, and his breath smelled faintly of whiskey. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" Imani lifted her eyes to his, and in a voice as light as a whisper said, "Your wife knows what you did in Miami last summer." The man's entire face drained of color. He staggered backward, hands trembling. What did you say?" Imani didn't answer, only blinked once, as though what she'd said were the most ordinary thing in the world. The man spun on his heel and practically ran down the street, the echo of his polished shoes sharp against the concrete. Moments later, Imani began to walk again, her bare feet silent on the pavement. She stopped in front of a convenience store. Inside, a short man in a red apron was closing out the cash register. The door jingled as she slipped inside. "Hey, kid, we're closed," the shopkeeper barked, glancing up from the till. "You stole cash from your best friend's register," Imani murmured, her eyes fixed on his. He froze, the bills in his hands crumpling. "Who the hell told you that?" Imani didn't respond, just tilted her head, studying him, as though peering into some hidden place he couldn't see. The shopkeeper's face turned blotchy. He dropped the money, stumbled around the counter, and pushed past her, nearly tearing the door from its hinges as he fled into the night. Outside, Imani continued her silent wandering. It was nearly midnight when she found herself in front of a run-down motel. She stepped under the orange glow of the buzzing neon sign. A man was leaning against a lamppost, arguing into his phone. "I'm telling you, I can't stand your sister. No, I'm not going to..." Imani stood right beside him, her presence sudden as a ghost. "You're planning to run away with her sister," she said. The man dropped his phone. Who told you that?" He bent to scoop up the device, then glared at Imani. "Who the hell are you?" Imani just blinked at him, unblinking and calm. "Stay away from me!" the man shouted. He shoved her backward and took off at a sprint into the darkness. Somebody nearby gasped. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed across Imani's face. As a patrol car rolled to a stop, 2 officers stepped out, hands on their belts. "Hey there, kid," said Officer Thomas, his voice gentle but wary. "Are you lost?" Imani didn't speak. Her eyes swept over them, as though she were looking through their uniforms into something deeper. "Where's your family?" Officer Thomas tried again. "They're gone," Imani whispered. Officer Martinez, standing beside Thomas, sighed. "Ah, hell. Another runaway." "She's so little," Thomas murmured, "probably scared to death." "She doesn't look scared," Martinez said. "Look at her face. It's like she's listening to something. Imani finally spoke, her voice so soft the officers had to lean in. "I see things in people's minds," she said. "I hear their secrets." Officer Martinez rolled his eyes. "Great. Fantastic, we've got a psychic kid on our hands." Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but Imani suddenly turned to Martinez. "You're still wearing her perfume, aren't you?" she said. "The woman you see every Thursday." Thomas froze. The color drained from his face. "Oh, how do you know that?" Imani simply blinked, her expression unreadable. "Jesus," Martinez whispered, "this kid's not normal." Officer Thomas frowned. Okay, let's calm down." He squatted in front of Imani. "Honey, you keep asking for someone named Judge Reynolds. Why? Who is he?" Imani stared into his eyes, as though seeing something far away. "I need to talk to Judge Reynolds," she said. "He's hiding something. He needs to tell the truth." "About what?" Thomas pressed. Imani didn't answer. She just lowered her gaze, hugging her thin arms around herself. Martinez let out a shaky breath. "Look, she's scaring people half to death out here. If she wants the judge, maybe the courthouse can figure out where she belongs." Thomas nodded reluctantly. "Let's take her in. Maybe the judge will know what to do." They led Imani to the patrol car. She slid into the back seat silently, her bare feet dangling above the floor. Martinez drove, glancing at her in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Outside, the neon lights and endless city blocks slid past. Inside, the car was silent except for the quiet hum of the engine, and the sense that, even in the hush, Imani was hearing voices no one else could hear. Somewhere in the darkness, the first hint of dawn began to creep over the rooftops as they headed toward the courthouse, and toward secrets waiting to be unearthed. Morning sunlight streamed through the high windows of the Fulton County Courthouse, washing the marble floors in pale gold. Inside courtroom 3B, the air buzzed with the soft murmur of lawyers flipping through files, reporters adjusting cameras, and spectators chatting in low tones. At the center of it all sat Judge Peter Reynolds, behind the towering mahogany bench. His robes were crisp, his hair combed neatly back, every inch the image of authority. He adjusted his glasses and banged the gavel once. "Let's proceed with the docket," he called, his voice echoing off the paneled walls. An attorney stepped forward to speak, but the heavy wooden doors creaked open. All eyes turned. Deputy Marshal Harris entered, looking uneasy. Beside him, holding tightly to the hem of his uniform jacket, was Imani Harris. Whispers rippled through the courtroom as people craned their necks for a better look. A barefoot child in a courthouse was an unusual sight. Judge Reynolds frowned. "Deputy Harris, what is this? Why is there a child in my courtroom during session?" "Your Honor," Harris said, voice strained, "this is Imani Harris. She demanded to see you." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Demanded? She's a child." "I tried to get her to speak to anyone else, sir. She refused." Imani stood close to Harris, her wide brown eyes fixed on Reynolds. She looked even smaller under the high ceilings of the courtroom, like a bird that had wandered into a cathedral. Her braids hung loose around her shoulders, the denim jacket swallowing her thin frame. Reynolds pinched the bridge of his nose. "All right, bring her forward." Harris gently guided Imani to the center of the courtroom. Murmurs rose in volume. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "He's so tiny. Why does she want to see the judge?" Imani stared up at Reynolds, her eyes unwavering. "Your Honor," Harris said cautiously, "she insists. She can read your mind." A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by a wave of nervous laughter. Judge Reynolds blinked, then let out a short, sharp laugh. "You can read my mind?" he said, leaning back in his chair. That's cute, sweetheart, but this is a courtroom, not a circus. A few chuckles echoed around the gallery. Manny didn't even blink. She kept her gaze locked on Reynolds. You don't believe me, she whispered. Her voice barely carried, but somehow everyone heard. Nobody does. Until I tell them what they've been hiding. The laughter stopped like a needle scratched off a record. Reynolds's smile faded. Young lady, you're clearly upset. If someone's hurt you, or if you're in trouble, Maimani interrupted, speaking louder. I need you to tell the truth about what happened. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom again. People shifted in their seats. A reporter scribbled furiously in a notebook. Reynolds's jaw tightened. What happened about what? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Amani said, still in that eerie, calm voice. You've been hiding it for years. The thing that makes you wake up at night. Reynolds stiffened. That's enough, he snapped. Deputy Harris, please escort this child out of the courtroom. Harris hesitated. Amani turned her gaze on him, her big brown eyes shining as though with inner light. I have to talk to Judge Reynolds, she said. He has to say it, or I will. Someone in the gallery whispered, What's she talking about? Reynolds slammed the gavel. Silence in the court. Mani stepped closer, so close now that she was practically standing beneath the bench. She lifted her chin, her voice growing clearer. You can keep pretending, she said, but you can't hide from me. I see it. I hear it. Reynolds's eyes darted left and right as though searching for an escape. His fingers drummed the polished wood of the bench. This is ridiculous, he said finally, though his voice sounded less certain. She's a child, looking for attention, nothing more. But Amani didn't move. Didn't flinch. I'm not looking for attention, she said. I'm trying to help the woman who's screaming in your mind. A shiver ran through the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged alarmed looks. Reynolds clenched his fists. That's enough, he barked. This is a court of law, not a stage for fairy tales. Amani's eyes softened, almost sad. Then tell them it's a fairy tale, she said. Tell them what you did. Reynolds's face went pale for a split second. Then he slammed the gavel so hard that the sound echoed like a gunshot. Deputy Harris, remember her, now. But Harris looked frozen, caught between obedience and something he couldn't name. A feeling creeping down his spine as he stared into Amani's eyes. She took another tiny step forward. You don't have to be afraid, she said softly. But she's tired of waiting. She wants people to know. Reynolds glared at her, but his eyes were wide and glassy. I don't know what you're talking about, he whispered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Amani tilted her head. Yes, you do. And for a long, suspended moment, no one in the courtroom moved. The silence felt like it might crack under the weight of the secrets pressing into that space. From the gallery came a single voice, trembling but curious. Judge, what is she talking about? Reynolds's lips parted, but no words came out. Amani lowered her hand from her chest and folded it in front of her small body. Tomorrow, she said softly. Tomorrow, everyone will know. Reynolds flinched as if struck. And for the first time that morning, the great Judge Peter Reynolds looked afraid. Sunlight glared through the tall windows of the courtroom, harsh and cold, but inside the air felt heavy as wet cement. A hush had fallen over the spectators, who sat forward in their seats, unable to tear their eyes away from the little girl standing in front of the towering judge. Amani Harris was still as a statue, small hand resting against the polished wooden bench as though drawing courage from its solid weight. Her loose braids brushed the shoulders of her oversized denim jacket. Her bare feet pressed against the marble floor, pale against the gleaming surface. Judge Peter Reynolds leaned forward slightly, looming over her from his high bench. His face was rigid, jaw tight, eyes hard. "Deputy Harris, I said, remove this child," he thundered. But Deputy Harris still hesitated. A bead of sweat slid down the side of his face as he stared at Amani, who didn't look at him at all. Her gaze was locked entirely on the judge. "Not leaving," Amani said quietly. Reynolds slammed the gavel, the sound sharp enough to make several people in the gallery flinch. "You're disrupting these proceedings. You're a child. This is no place for your nonsense." Vani took one small step closer. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said, voice delicate but firm. "I'm here because she wants me to tell the truth." "Who?" Reynolds snapped. Amani's eyes fluttered shut. She slowly raised her right hand and placed it lightly on top of his head. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Don't touch the judge," a lawyer hissed, but no one moved forward to intervene. Aile kept her small hand there as if it belonged. Her eyelids quivered. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered, her voice suddenly distant, like it came from somewhere far below the earth. "You didn't mean to do it. You didn't think the fall would kill her." Reynolds froze. His fingers tightened around the edges of his bench, knuckles white. "You're lying," he growled. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Amani didn't flinch. "You pushed her," she whispered. "You were angry. She said no. She wanted to leave." A thin trickle of sweat rolled down Reynolds' temple. Gasps rippled through the gallery as people turned to each other, whispering furiously. "Pushed who?" someone called out from the back. "What's she talking about?" "You buried her by the river," Amani continued, her voice gaining strength. "You thought the current would carry her away, but the soil was thick. The river didn't take her." Reynolds' lips parted in a silent gasp. His eyes darted toward the courtroom door, as if calculating how fast he could run. "You're making this up," he rasped, but even as he said it, his voice sounded hollow. Amani leaned in closer, lowering her voice so only Reynolds could hear. "You kept her bracelet." Reynolds jerked as though struck. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Amani raised her voice so the gallery could hear. "You kept the bracelet you tore off her wrist. You hid it in a wooden box under the floorboards in your study." The lawyer dropped his pen. The clatter echoed like a gunshot. Reynolds' eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no words came out. You don't know what you're talking about," he croaked at last. "You're a child. A child. How could you possibly know these things?" Amani blinked, her hand still resting on his head, her voice eerily calm. "Because I hear her voice. Every night, when you're trying to sleep. She's still screaming." The gallery erupted into frantic whispers. Reynolds slammed his gavel again and again. "Order! Order in this court!" His voice cracked. But Amani kept speaking, her words slicing through the noise like a blade. The name was Claire Donovan. A ripple of shock shot through the courtroom. In the gallery, a young man leapt to his feet, his face pale and trembling. "My sister," he choked out. "Claire, my sister!" Reynolds' eyes snapped toward the young man. I don't know what you're talking about," he shouted, voice rising into a shrill edge. Amani pressed on. "She trusted you," Amanya said, her voice growing fierce. "You promised to drive her home, but when she said no, you got angry. You pushed her, and when she stopped breathing, you panicked. You thought no one would ever find out." Reynolds' legs wobbled. He tried to stand, but fell back into his chair, chest heaving. "Shut up!" he screamed, spit flying. "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" But Amani was relentless. "You piled rocks over her," she said, as though reciting from a memory etched into stone. You thought that would be enough, but the river couldn't hide her forever." "Lies!" Reynolds roared. His face was a deep crimson now, sweat pouring down his neck. Omani tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Then why do you see her every night? Why do you hear her crying? Why does she keep screaming for help in your dreams?" Reynolds stared at her, chest heaving, eyes wild. The courtroom had gone utterly silent again. The earlier whispers transformed into stunned, horrified silence. Amani slowly lowered her hand from his head. She stood back a step, breathing hard. "She's screaming again right now," Amani said, voice quivering as if an echo of someone else's pain. "She says she won't stop until the truth comes out." Reynolds let out a strangled sob and collapsed forward onto the bench, trembling violently. The young man in the gallery shouted through tears, "You told us she ran away, you monster!" Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning. Deputy Harris finally stepped in front of Amani, as if to shield her from the chaos, but Amani seemed not to notice anyone around her. She kept her eyes on Reynolds, waiting, as though she knew there was still more to come. The courtroom was a storm of chaos. Reporters leaned over wooden barriers, shoving cameras forward, flashes sparking off the polished benches. Lawyers scrambled to restrain them, voices overlapping in a rising tide of panic. Spectators were half standing, half sitting, eyes wide, some clasping hands over their mouths in shock. At the center of it all, Judge Peter Reynolds sat slumped in his chair, shoulders shaking as he stared blankly at the little girl before him. His face was deathly pale, as though every drop of blood had drained away. Deputy Harris tried again to pull Amani Harris back, but she stood firm, her eyes still locked on to the trembling judge. "I want this child removed from my court," Reynolds screamed, his voice breaking into a rasp. "She's lying! She's trying to destroy me!" But Amani didn't blink. Her braids hung over her shoulders like soft ropes as she spoke. "You can scream all you want," she said quietly. "It won't change what you did." Reynolds slammed his palm against the bench, making a sharp crack that echoed across the courtroom. "You're a child," he bellowed. "A child. You don't know anything about me." Amani tilted her head slightly, studying him as though he were a puzzle she was fitting together piece by piece. "I know everything," she said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I hear her crying, even now." Reynolds' lower lip quivered. He gripped the edge of his bench so hard his knuckles turned white. "Stop it," he hissed, voice low and dangerous. "Stop saying these things." Amani spoke louder, her voice carrying to the farthest rows of the gallery. "You buried her near the riverbank. You thought the current would take her away, but the ground was too thick. So you piled rocks over her body." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A lawyer dropped a stack of papers, the pages scattering like snow across the floor. Reynolds shook his head violently. "You're lying. You're making this up." Amani stepped closer, her small bare feet silent on the marble floor. "You kept her bracelet," she said. "It's in a wooden box, under the floorboards in your study. You took it off her wrist when she scratched your face trying to get away." Reynolds' breath hitched. His eyes widened. His hand flew unconsciously to his cheek, brushing a spot near his jawline as though feeling phantom scratches. From the back of the courtroom came the young man's voice again, choked and trembling. What bracelet? What is she talking about?" Amani turned her head slightly, speaking loud enough for the entire room. "The silver bracelet with the small heart charm. He ripped it off her wrist after he pushed her." The courtroom exploded into shouts and screams. Reporters surged forward, microphones outstretched. "Judge Reynolds, is it true? Did you kill Claire Donovan? Do you have her bracelet?" Reynolds shrank into his seat, trying to shield his face from the onslaught of cameras. "Lies!" he bellowed, spittle flying. "This is slander. I'm an honorable judge. She's just a child." Imani ignored the shouting around her. Her voice remained steady and calm, as though she were reciting facts from a textbook. "You promised to drive Claire home that night," she said. "She trusted you. But when she said no, when she tried to leave, you pushed her." Reynolds' chest heaved. "No," he rasped. It was an accident." Imani's eyes softened, though her voice stayed strong. "You didn't mean for her to die," she said gently. "But when she stopped breathing, you panicked. You told yourself you'd been forgiven because you became a lawyer, then a judge. But she never forgave you. She's still screaming." The young man in the back pushed his way forward, tears streaming down his face. His voice cracked as he yelled, "You said she ran away. You lied to her whole family. You destroyed us." Reynolds stared at him, eyes huge and terrified. "Tyler, Tyler's fists clenched at his sides. "My sister was Claire Donovan. You bastard. You murdered her." Reynolds' composure shattered completely. He clutched the edge of the bench, eyes darting wildly around the room, as though searching for some escape. "It was an accident," he howled. She was screaming. She wouldn't stop screaming. "I didn't mean to." Imani raised her voice to cut through his panicked wails. "She says you see her every night in your dreams. The way she looked when she fell. The way she hit her head on the rocks." Reynolds let out a strangled sob. His gavel slipped from his hand and clattered onto the bench. "She's screaming again now," Imani whispered, her voice trembling with an echo of someone else's agony. "She says she won't stop until the truth comes out." Reynolds slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. Sobs racked his body as his shoulders shook violently. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he choked out between gasps for breath. "It was supposed to be a secret. No one was supposed to know." The courtroom stood frozen, even the reporters stunned into silence for a fleeting second. Deputy Harris stepped closer, his voice low and careful. "Your Honor, is this true?" Reynolds didn't lift his head. His voice came muffled through his fingers. I just wanted her to be quiet." Tyler's voice broke the silence, shaking with rage and grief. "You're a monster." Reynolds tried to reach for him, but Tyler backed away as though the judge were toxic to the touch. Suddenly, 2 uniformed officers entered the courtroom, badges gleaming. One stepped forward and spoke into the hush. "Judge Peter Reynolds, you're under arrest for the murder of Claire Donovan." Reynolds finally looked up, eyes red and wild. "Please, it was an accident. I thought I'd been forgiven." The officers moved in, snapping cuffs around his wrists. The judge of the court, once feared, respected, admired, was hauled from the bench, stumbling as cameras flashed wildly. Imani watched him go, her eyes steady, unblinking. "She always knew," she said softly as Reynolds passed. "She just needed someone to listen." As Reynolds was dragged through the courtroom door, the echoes of his sobs hung in the heavy silence, like the last toll of a funeral bell. The echoes of the slammed gavel still hung in the air like the ring of a distant bell. The chaos in the courtroom ebbed slowly, leaving behind a stunned hush. Officers led Judge Peter Reynolds away in handcuffs, his black robes brushing the polished floor as he shuffled forward like a man who'd aged 20 years in an hour. Cameras flashed from every angle, reporters barking questions he no longer seemed capable of hearing. "And personal, it was supposed to be a secret," Reynolds muttered, eyes empty, lips quivering. "No one was supposed to know." The courtroom door slammed shut behind him, cutting off the flood of reporters and leaving behind only the people who had witnessed the entire thing. At the front of the room, Imani Harris remained standing, her small shoulders straight, her bare feet still planted on the cold marble floor. The sunlight streaming through the windows framed her like a glowing halo. Tyler Donovan, his face blotched with tears, stared at the spot where Reynolds had just been. His chest heaved, struggling for breath. "She said she ran away," he whispered. "All these years. All those nights my mom cried. He just lied." Amity turned her eyes toward him. "She's quiet now," she said softly. "She says she can rest." Tyler's lower lip trembled. Did you really hear her voice?" Amani blinked, the movement slow and deliberate. "I don't just hear thoughts," she said. "I hear the voices of the ones people try to silence." Tyler swallowed hard, a mixture of grief and wonder in his gaze. Deputy Harris approached cautiously, still looking shell-shocked. He glanced from Amani to the rest of the courtroom, which was filled with lawyers and spectators staring in silent disbelief. "Amani," Harris said, his voice gentle. "How did you know all of that? How did you know about the bracelet, about the river?" Amani tilted her head slightly, as though considering how to answer. "Sometimes, the ones who are gone. They speak so loud, it's impossible not to hear them." A few reporters who had stayed behind leaned forward, microphones lowered for once. Are there others speaking to you, Amani?" one whispered. Amani's eyes swept over the courtroom, lingering on faces one by one. "There are always others," she said, "but not everyone wants to listen." Harris knelt down to her level, his voice dropping to a murmur. "Do you have any family, honey? Any place to go?" Amani hesitated for a moment. Then she shook her head. "They're gone." Harris sighed, a deep, heavy sound. "Well, you can't just walk back out on the streets alone." "I won't be alone," Amani said, voice quiet but certain. "They're always with me." Tyler wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand. He stared at Amani for a long moment before stepping closer. I don't know what to say," he said. "My sister, Claire, she was everything to me. If you ever need somewhere to stay," his voice cracked again, "you can come with me." Amani studied his face, her expression thoughtful and sad. "She says thank you," she whispered. "She wants you to remember the way she laughed, not the way she left." Tyler choked on a sob. He nodded, his eyes flooding with tears again. Harris rose and placed a gentle hand on Amani's shoulder. "We'll figure this out, okay?" But as her mind stepped back from his touch, looking suddenly distant, as though she were already somewhere else. "I have to go," she murmured. "There are more voices waiting." She turned away, her bare feet padding softly over the marble. A path opened for her as people instinctively stepped aside. She moved through the hushed courtroom like a whisper, leaving behind only the echo of her presence. At the double doors she paused and glanced back. "Tell the truth," she said simply. "It's the only way the screaming stops." Then she slipped out into the bright Atlanta sunlight, the doors swinging shut behind her with a quiet thud. For several long moments, no one spoke. Tyler Donovan wiped his eyes, staring at the doors through which Amani had vanished. Harris turned to the remaining officers and lawyers. "Make sure a unit checks out the judge's house. Look under the floorboards." One of the officers nodded solemnly. "We'll find the bracelet." A low hum of conversation started up as people slowly came back to life. Lawyers gathered their papers. Reporters began dictating breathless summaries into their phones. But the entire room felt changed, as though the shadows in the corners held secrets waiting to be told. Outside, sunlight poured onto the courthouse steps, where people had begun to gather, waiting for news, waiting for answers. And somewhere, barefoot on the Atlanta streets, Amani Harris was already moving on, her head tilted as though listening to voices only she could hear. Some secrets can't stay buried forever. What would you do if you could hear the voices others try to hide? If you enjoyed this story, give us a thumbs up, subscribe for more dramatic tales, and let us know your thoughts in the comments.